Hi everyone. My name is Emmy Amaretti. I'm Assistant Director of our Online Writing Center, and we have a surprise guest with us tonight, Sarah Tabawada, our multilingual specialist. Her name is not on the slide because I didn't know that she was coming, but she's here. Yay! Say hi, Sarah.
Ahoy, everybody.
Yay! So our topic for this webinar is responsible citation practices in APA style. Um, We are going to go through several objectives and keep in mind that we will send out the recording and the slide deck through links tomorrow if you're interested in revisiting it. And all of the links in the slide deck will be active when we send that out. So our learning objectives for this webinar are understand why writers integrate and cite source information, integrate and cite quotations and paraphrases in APA format, and consider best practices for citing generative AI or Gen AI as a source. Our first learning objective is to understand why writers integrate and cite source information. So you may know that to support claims and present strong arguments in your writing, academic writers must incorporate evidence in the form of quotes, paraphrases, and summaries from reliable sources. But there are also other reasons that we use sources in our writing. We use them to enhance our own credibility because when we cite a reliable source, it demonstrates that we have done our research and have thorough knowledge of the topic that we're writing about. And also through integrating sources, the writer's voice and analysis blends with the voices of other experts in the field to develop a new conversation that contributes to ongoing scholarship. Um, in the context of considering a piece of writing that you're doing as a conversation, um, you can consider this integration of sources as more than just a requirement of, oh, I need three sources. Let me make sure I do that. You can take it as kind of this motivation to dive into this academic conversation as you craft your paper. So, in a good conversation, the back and forth between speakers is balanced. And you want to keep an eye on that same sort of balance in your written scholarly conversation. First, focus on strategic use of sources. Don't simply use a quote because you feel like you haven't used one in a while. Make sure that the quotes in your paragraphs add support, details, and clarity to the argument. Next, avoid the instinct to let a source speak for itself or sit isolated within your text. When you do either of those things, the source can overwhelm your own voice in the conversation, and you want to make sure that you want to make sure that you connect the source information to information in your own words and explicitly show the readers how that source supports your own ideas. So here's a fun little visual that we have put together. So the key concept we're talking about here is source integration. And according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, integrate means to form, coordinate, or blend into a functioning or unified whole, like all the pieces of yarn are woven together to create this blanket here. The goal of integrating sources is to create a unified piece of writing where your own ideas and the ideas from your sources work seamlessly together to form a strong, coherent argument. Sometimes you even hear people talk about weaving in your sources. So in your text, your ideas and voice are like the warp of the fabric, of this fabric, like the red horizontal threads that are spanning across it and holding everything together. And the source information contributes to the weft of the fabric, which is like the vertical, differently colored threads that integrate together to create the body and the pattern. So as we go throughout this webinar, we're going to look at examples of how to craft a similar composition with words instead of yarn. But the yarn is very colorful and pretty, so I thought we'd look
I
at it
like
for a
it.
while. Yeah, it's pretty. So even as we are striving to create this integrated kind of whole, we want to make sure that we acknowledge use of our sources very explicitly. In other words, we need to signal to our audience where those vertical yellow or pink or purple threads came from. And why do we need to do that? First off, we need to give credit where credit is due. Other people have done a lot of work to create their own ideas, and we need to recognize the work and contributions of those other people. When you cite a source, it actually enables your readers to locate your borrowed ideas in their original context, but also to look up additional information that they might want to learn about the topic. Um, Acknowledging your sources also shows that academic conversation kind of in action. I said this, but they said this. It shows which ideas are yours and which belong to the other author. Acknowledging sources is also super important because it lets you avoid plagiarism, which is a pretty serious academic offense that can have significant consequences on your grades or even your ability to continue attending classes at an institution. So,
Mm,
yes, we want to make
makes sense.
sure we acknowledge our sources for all these reasons. So, fortunately, most of our classes here use APA format, and APA format gives us a guide for acknowledging these sources. And in APA, we have two pieces to our sources. We have a reference entry and an in-text citation. The reference entry usually begins with the author's last name and year of publication, and it includes full information about the source. References are listed on a separate page at the end of a paper. By comparison, component number two, the in-text citation, that's in your paper. That's why it's called in-text. It usually includes the author's last name and year of publication again, plus the page for a direct quote, and it will appear in or in parentheses after the sentence that includes the borrowed idea. We're going to spend a whole lot of time looking at citations in the next portion of the webinar, but before we do that, let's look at a couple of examples of references super quickly. Sarah, do these references look exactly the same?
Doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. They shouldn't.
No, they don't, because one's a book and one's a journal article. So in APA, reference formats differ based on the source type and characteristics. Specifically, we need to include the details so that the reader knows what type of source we're using, what the source is, and how they're going to locate that source. So for a book, as in this first example with Lowry, it was written by Lowry. The next component is the year 2016. We know the title of the book, which is Choosing and Using Sources, A Guide to Academic Research. And the publisher of that book was Ohio State University Libraries. That's all the information we need to know to find that book. In contrast, let's look at the journal article. Here we have our authors listed and then the year of publication. But in addition to knowing the name of the whole journal, which is the International Journal of Teaching and Learning in Higher Education, we need to know the name of the article itself because they didn't write the whole journal, they just wrote one article. So supporting source integration in student writing. Then we have the journal name, the volume and issue number, the page numbers so that the reader can find it very easily. And here we have a publicly accessible URL because this journal didn't have a DOI. If it has a DOI number, you'll use that instead in your APA reference. But despite the differences of the details of these, they both start the same way with the author and the date information. And that is very important because beginning them with the author and date is how we allow our reader to key our in-text citations back to them. In APA, citations follow author date format. So we've got Lowry, 2016, or Raphael et al. 2017. And that tells
Oh,
the reader that we need to find in our alphabetical list of references that author and that year. And it makes it very easy to match them up.
question.
Yes, Sarah.
Now, when I'm looking at that second source,
Mm-hmm.
what is this et al business all about? Because
Oh, that et al. Means and others. Because see, over here we've got Refaye, whose name I have misspelled. Make sure that you spell their name correctly. I'm pretty sure it's an R-A is how you spell their name. And then they've also got Kumar, Waman, and Peplow. So in the in-text citation, we don't want it to be as long as a paragraph. So we're not going to list all four authors' names. We're going to list the name of the first author followed by et al., which is Latin for and others. And that's going to tell the reader that the first author of the reference is Raphael. I'm sorry for misspelling your name in one spot. Et al. And others. So there's more people who wrote that article. Very good question. So we're going to move on to learning objective 2 because as I promised, we're going to talk so much more about citation now. Um, Integrating and citing quotations and paraphrases in APA format. So before we look at integrating and citing quotations, let's review what a quotation is. A quotation consists of someone's exact words enclosed in quotation marks, or if it's long, you set it off as a block from the rest of your text. Um, by and large, you should avoid those large blocks of quoted text unless it's absolutely necessary. And quotations overall should be used sparingly and strategically in the best way to support your argument. If you use too many quotations, then your writing gets overwhelmed by the voices of these other people. And again, we want to make sure that those red threads of your own voice are running continuously through your own paper and holding everything together. So here's an on-theme example of a quote with a citation. To succeed as an academic writer, students must, quote or reproduce materials that readers will find especially convincing, purposeful, and interesting, unquote. The quoted words are in quotation marks, and it's followed by an APA-style citation with the author information. Again, we have Lunsford et al. So Lunsford is the first author. Et al. Means there are others. 2016 is the year, and we have the page number, page 443. So let's talk about when to use direct quotations. First off, when something is said so well and convincingly that it is worth repeating. Sometimes that's just as simple as that. But sometimes you can put it in your own words. And in that case, it's if you can do it just as well, that's when you should try paraphrasing, which is what we're going to talk about later. Another reason to use a direct quote is if the original author's authority on the subject lends credibility to your argument. For instance, if you were talking about a specific type of surgery and you had a quote from one of the leading doctors who does research on that specific topic, then you could quote that author in your paper, and that would show your reader that their conceptualization of it was really important, and that lends credibility to your own argument and strengthens your ideas. Last, you might use a direct quote in your paper if you think the passage's meaning could be altered or unclear if you try to paraphrase it. This is something to think about if you're talking about really technical ideas, if you want to apply a specific definition or refer to a specific part of like a policy. In those cases, you might want to replicate the language exactly and use a direct quote. And another thing you might have in your future, if you're a doctoral student, you may be interviewing people or using open-ended questions on surveys with people. And when it comes time to write your doctoral project or your dissertation, of course, you will quote your participants from that setting. All right, back to the nitty-gritty of APA citation. We're going to talk more about two types of APA citations you can use when you quote in your papers. The first option is called a narrative citation. That means you name the author directly in your text, and sometimes people will refer to that part with the author's name as a signal phrase to signal, hey, I'm going to cite information from this person, and this is who I'm citing. So this option is helpful if you want to highlight the author, maybe that leading scholar or doctor that we talked about a little while ago, or maybe you are you citing an author that is from one of the week's course resources? If you want to show that you used your course resources, you may want to introduce the quote using the author, saying something like this. See, it is Raphael with an A. I'm sorry about the E before. So Raphael et al., parentheses, 2017, concluded, citation skills cannot be divorced from accompanying critical thinking and reading skills, page 535. So we have their name in the sentence. We have the year in parentheses immediately after it. And at the end, we have the page number after P period and then the number. And the period for the entire sentence goes after that citation. It does not go at the end of the quote. Oops. The other way that you can cite in the text still includes the same three elements of the author's name, the year, and that page number, or where you can specifically find the quote in the article or the book. We saw this previously on other slides. It's called a parenthetical citation, and this is where you put all the information at the end of the sentence that includes the borrowed idea, and you put it in parentheses. So here you could say something else to lead into your quote other than so and so stated. Here I've got practitioners have emphasized, quote, the difference between citation and integration as distinct skills, end quote. Then I've got in my parentheses, Raphael et al. Spelled correctly,
Woohoo.
2017, yay! And here, this crossed over 2 pages. So if you're directly quoting something that crosses over 2 pages, you use 2 Ps, PP, period, and then the page range with a N dash in between, 535 through 536. And you will notice that in the parenthetical citation, all of the elements are separated by commas so that you can tell what piece of information is which. And the period still comes after the citation. It does not come at the end of the direct quote. Okay, now that we've talked about when to use direct quotes and how to cite direct quotes, let's consider some more the best way to present direct quotes in your paper. So avoid dropping a direct quote into your paper. That means avoid putting in your paper where it's surrounded by the quotation marks and it's not connected to any of your own language. Instead, you can use a simple signal phrase like so and so said, or another lead in, as we demonstrated in the second example on our previous slide. Um, and that helps to frame the quote and integrate it to your own words. When you present the quote, please don't forget to cite. For the quote, you will always include a page number with that P period and then the number. APA gives you ways that you can cite if you don't have a paginated resource. If there's no page available, you can use a paragraph number by counting down from the top of the text. This is helpful for things on websites. And you introduce that with para, P-A-R-A period, and then the number. Or you can also use section headings where you put the section name and then the word section after it. And we're going to see a couple of examples, maybe 2 slides down the way, or the next slide. Now, remember, whether you are quoting or paraphrasing, don't let your resources take over your paper. Instead, be sure to analyze every quote that you include, comment on the quote, and explain how it supports your main point or the premise of your paragraph. So we're going to dig into this more with some upcoming examples. So I'm glad Sarah's here because our signal phrase examples feature the wonderful tutors of our online writing center and their favorite topic of cats.
Oh,
So
excellent.
yay. So the first example, Dr. Bradley. Bradley 2020 affirmed the need for constant human-animal play to engage a cat's creativity. This is the format we've seen on the previous slides, talking about signal phrases with the person's name, the year in parentheses, and then a verb. But you don't have to do it that way every time. You can use phrasing like according to Johnson Archer, our wonderful director who left a few minutes ago. According to Johnson Archer 2022, most cats enjoy sunbathing in the early morning. This one's from paragraph 4, so we use that paragraph notation. And last, Taboada. Taboada's 2025 research rejected the hypothesis that cats are less friendly than dogs. Results section. Here, Tabawada is in the possessive. It's her research. Um, Notice that if we do that, we still put the year right after the name. We
Mhm.
don't put Tabawada's research, parentheses 2025, even though it may seem weird to split it up. We want to keep that year right after the author's name. And this is an example of how you can use a section heading. Results was the name of the section, so we write results and then section. Yay.
Mhm. My research is very current.
Yes, it is. She just published it. So you may have noticed that all our examples we've used past tense verbs to describe the work of other authors. This is a rule in APA format because when we write in APA, we conceptualize that these authors did their research and writing in the past. We don't use literary present in APA. They did it in the past. Even if Sarah published her writing on cats this morning, it was still in the past. So we're going to use a past tense verb. Um, we're not going to read through this whole list, obviously, but here is a list of very snazzy verbs that you can refer back to later if you want to create variety in your text and also express different ways that authors interacted with information that they shared. Maybe they acknowledged a concept. Maybe they countered someone else's idea by saying this. Maybe they endorsed a position, or maybe they speculated about an outcome. There are lots of verbs that you can use to describe what people did other than they said or they stated. And that can add a lot of nuance to your writing and interest as well. Now, here's a sandwich. We mentioned earlier that you shouldn't just drop in a quote, but should frame it in your own words and apply it to a larger context. And one strategy to integrate quotes to accomplish these goals is to create a quotation sandwich or to use the sandwich technique. You might hear it referred to both ways. With the sandwich technique, the top slice of bread in your sandwich is the signal phrase with the author's name. Perhaps you want to include their affiliation to add credibility and the citation with the year. The quote is the meat, vegetables, peanut butter, or whatever you think makes your sandwich super yummy. Make sure that that is set off by quotation marks. And the bottom slice of bread in the sandwich is your explanation of the quote and your connection of the quote's idea back to your paragraph's topic sentence or main idea. So we're going to make a quote sandwich next.
Mm,
I'm hungry. I haven't had dinner yet, so it's a pretty nice
yeah,
picture of a sandwich.
I
I will
know.
point out that all of the images we have used in this webinar are from Microsoft Office, which means we don't need to cite them according to APA guidelines. We can just use them and be happy with our picture of a woven blanket and a sandwich. Before we make a quote sandwich, we're going to look at an example of a dropped quote. It has no bottom bread, so my peanut butter is just on the plate, making a big mess. This quote,
Sorry,
I
sorry if
like
we're making anyone hungry.
I like peanut butter sandwiches. So
Mhm.
in this example, the quote stands by itself. Let's read it. Researchers have emphasized the role of users in mitigating the potential threats generative AI poses to academic research and writing. Quote, there are certain responsibilities that all authors of scientific research papers bear, which cannot be assumed by any computer or program. End quote. Derga et al., 2023, page 617. So, as I just mentioned, this quote stands on its own. If those quotation marks were handles, I like to say that, I could pick it up by those handles and pull it right out, and it wouldn't disturb any of the surrounding text, which means it's definitely not integrated. Because if I had a nice piece of fabric and I pulled one of the threads out, it's going to make a hole, and I'm going to notice it a lot more than if I raised this out by the quotation marks. It's also not clear this way who Derga et al. Are, or if they are authoritative or credible in terms of discussing this topic. The relevance of the quote is also not established, so its impact is minimal. But let's look at what happens when we turn it into a quote sandwich. And with the color in the middle, you can see the bread at the top and the bottom. My peanut butter is in the bread, not on my plate now. In this case, we've got researchers have emphasized the role of users in mitigating the potential threats Gen AI poses to academic research and writing. Derga et al. 2023, in an article for Biology of Sport, highlighted the ethical issues raised by the application of AI tools in academic contexts, noting, quote, there are certain responsibilities that all authors of scientific research papers bear, which cannot be assumed by any computer or program. This insight reinforces the importance of human oversight in maintaining academic integrity. In this case, the quote is anchored. If I took that out, part of my sentence would be gone. So it's quite well integrated. The reader understands the identity and authority of Derga et al. The signal phrase situates the quote in relation to the work of the original author, and the follow-up sentence ties the quote to the student writer's main idea. So it's a nice sandwich for you to bite into to better understand the topic. Here's another example of a quote. This one is from Huang and Tan, date 2023, and it's on page 1151. So how are we going to cite this in the text? Bam. Okay, so part of it I've paraphrased in my own words to tie it to what we want to talk about. ChatGPT's training on vast data sets of publicly available text, including books, articles, and websites, introduces a risk of plagiarism, as noted by Huang and Tan, 2023, who observed that its output may resemble text from other sources. So the quoted words are in quotation marks. Huang and Tan are named in my paper, in my sentence rather, and the page number is at the end. Now we are going to pivot to look at paraphrases. What's a paraphrase? A paraphrase includes the details of a passage, like someone else's ideas, but it's in your own words and your own syntax or sentence structure. Paraphrases, like direct quotations, still have to be appropriately cited because we need to explain that this idea was not your original idea, but that it came from someone else. On the right, we have an example of a quote. At the top, it says, learning how to quote and paraphrase correctly is part of being a successful academic writer. That is from a work by Sun or Soon, 2017, page 223. So one of the cool things about paraphrasing is that you can choose how to present your ideas in a way that matches your intent as a writer. You don't have to carry Soon's intent as a writer into your paper. You can use their idea, but integrate it into your own purpose and presentation. So let's look at this first one. This says, Soon 2017 asserted that students must develop their quoting and paraphrasing skills to become scholarly writers. Here we highlighted the author, Soon 2017, by naming them in the sentence. Maybe again, they were featured in my course resources for the week, and I want to say, look, I'm using my resources. And in terms of the focus of idea, we addressed what students need to do to become more academic or scholarly writers. Perhaps this focus supports a larger paper on writing development in the classroom, but I chose how to frame it to match my larger context. Here is a different way to paraphrase that same quote. Quoting and paraphrasing skills form an important component of scholarly writing. It's the same idea as the quote, but there are a lot of differences. First of all, I've got Citation in parentheses at the end, soon, comma, 2017. Here we're de-emphasizing the author by placing them at the end of the sentence. We still need to name them, obviously, because they're the original person that we're citing to back up the claim, but we aren't focusing on them. Maybe they weren't in my readings, or maybe I just really want to focus on my main idea. And we're also not mentioning students in this version. We're focusing just on the skill set of quoting and paraphrasing. So perhaps this time I'm not talking about what student writers need to do. I'm focusing more on the skill set. And again, the way that I paraphrase here allows me to choose what I'm going to emphasize as the most important ideas. So, why does paraphrasing matter? Because we just talked earlier about when we would directly quote. Paraphrasing is actually how you need to address most of your paper. Paraphrasing allows you to maintain control over your essay. It keeps your own voice prominent. If you quote too much, your own ideas kind of get lost. And in that process, your credibility gets lost because you're not really demonstrating that you understand what you're writing about. You're showing that you can sequence other people's ideas perhaps logically, but the reader doesn't understand your take on it, and therefore you become less credible as an authority and an author. Paraphrasing is also a way to show off your knowledge and your understanding. I used to teach fifth and sixth grade, and one thing I used to get my students to do was explain something to other people because we talk about knowing something so well that you can teach it to others. Paraphrasing is kind of the same thing. If you know it well enough to explain it in your own words, that means that you really know it. Paraphrasing is also part of being a good rhetorical writer. It shows that you can listen and respond to other people's ideas and understand alternative perspectives. And it's actually a useful skill in everyday life. If you're talking to someone and you want to um, address what they're talking about, sometimes you restate what they've said to them in your own words to help both of you process it. And that encourages the development of intellectual empathy or understanding how others think. So when are we going to use paraphrases? I just said paraphrasing should really be the main method of incorporating source material. You should paraphrase when the details of the passage are significant to support your argument, but the exact wording is not. We had a couple of examples a few slides ago where the ideas were relevant and I wanted to emphasize different things. So the paraphrase took different approaches, targeting different content. You can also paraphrase when presenting complex or technical ideas where it would be clearer to your audience if you present it in your own voice. Maybe you've read a really complicated explanation for, I don't know, how generative AI works, something like that. And it's just so dense and so thick that you feel you can explain it better if you simplify it or bring it down a notch for whoever your audience happens to be. That's another great reason to paraphrase. So let's talk about the mechanics of paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is not just changing a few words in a sentence. An effective paraphrase of another person's writing alters both the word choice and the structure of the original sentence. And one way that you can paraphrase is to follow this strategy. So if you read the original passage, read it several times, then look away from it. Put it down, write your paraphrase on a note card, type it into your paper, say it out loud, and, record yourself using talk to text, something like that. Just say it in your own words. After that, check your version against the original to make sure your version accurately expresses all the essential information. You want to make sure that you're writing it in your own words, but also echoing the original idea accurately, even if you're refocusing it on something else. Next, review it for originality. Once it's accurate, make sure it's not too similar to the original. And we're going to show some examples of what too similar means in a couple of minutes. If it's too similar, purposely rearrange the sentence structure. Put the first idea at the end. put the middle idea at the beginning, something like that to mix it up so it's not the same. You can also try writing a paraphrase of your paraphrase and checking the meaning again, using the same strategy of look at it and then look away and write or say it and see what happens. If you end up, again, still using words from the original, you may want to just go ahead and quote that set of words, and you can use quotation marks to identify any unique term or phrases that you borrowed from the source. And finally, make sure that you cite according to APA formatting. If it's fully paraphrased, use the author's name and the year. If you end up using anything quoted, also add the page number so you're within APA compliance. Make sure that you keep your own comments, elaborations, or reactions separate from the paraphrase. A paraphrase should clearly and objectively reflect the source material. It shouldn't give your opinion on it or alter the content's meaning in any way. Okay, so here is an example of how we paraphrase. This is by a text by Derga et al. It was written in 2023. I'm going to paraphrase so I don't need the page, but this is talking about ChatGPT. So the original text says ChatGPT's raw output can be detected on careful inspection, particularly when the text contains more than a few paragraphs and the subject relates to scientific work. This is because LLMs, that's large language models, produce patterns of words based on statistical associations in their training data and prompts, meaning that their output can appear generic or contain simple errors. That explanation is kind of dense and hard to get through, so I want to explain that a little more simply. So I've got Dergat all 2023 observed several hallmarks of text generated by large language models such as ChatGPT, cautioning that the presence of errors and absence of detail makes such text easily detectable by the readers. Um, Avoiding accidental plagiarism is something that you need to keep an eye out for when you're paraphrasing, because accidental plagiarism most often occurs when you're paraphrasing and especially when you're learning to paraphrase. Um, so obviously plagiarism is when you present another author's work as your own. Um, that can occur because you are not rearranging the sentence enough or using enough different words. It can also occur when you blend your own writing with the original author's writing without citations. And sometimes you'll hear that referred to as patchwork plagiarism. Plagiarism also includes if you leave out an in-text citation for a quote or a paraphrase. Even if you put quotation marks around the quote and you don't put your citation, that could still be construed as plagiarism. Through ACU, we do offer a plagiarism checker called Turnitin. In your course, if you click on the page with the modules, the plagiarism checker will be listed usually in the section near the top, so you can run your paper through there. If you have trouble finding it or need assistance, you can reach out to the Online Writing Center. And I strongly encourage you to watch this video on using Turnitin to avoid plagiarism. Our director, Julie Johnson Archer, goes through a great explanation of how to read the Turnitin report, how to interpret it to recognize when there are possible instances of plagiarism and when there are some words that, it's okay for you to actually have repeated them because perhaps they're key terms or they're just really common words that you can't avoid repeating, in which case those would be called like a false flag. Even if Turnitin marked those, you might not need to be concerned about it. But that video is a great explanation of how to use the Turnitin tool and the Turnitin report. So we are going to look at some paraphrasing here. First off, we're going to look at an ineffective paraphrase. And here's the quote, which is from Lester, 1976. Students frequently overuse direct quotation in taking notes, and as a result, they overuse quotations in the final research paper. Probably only about 10% of your final manuscript should appear as directly quoted matter. Therefore, you should strive to limit the amount of exact transcribing of source materials while taking notes. So here's our ineffective plagiarized paraphrase. Students often use too many direct quotations when they take notes, resulting in too many of them in the final research paper. In fact, probably only about 10% of the final copy should consist of directly quoted material. So it's important to limit the amount of exact source material copied when you're taking notes. So here's the problems. First of all, this paraphrase isn't cited. We've obviously read Lester and gotten these ideas from them, but we haven't indicated that we borrowed them from another author using an APA citation. Secondly, the paraphrase is really close to the original, and here's some color coding to show you. So all of the purple words on the right and the purple words on the left are the same. Sometimes it's word forms, like the original says taking notes, this one says take notes. So there's just too much overlap here, even though the student has written some of their own words in the unhighlighted spots. It's a little too direct, and the sequence is exactly the same. So now let's look at a paraphrase that is more effective. So this one says, in research papers, students often quote excessively, failing to keep quoted material down to a desirable level. Because the problem often originates during note-taking, it is essential to minimize the material recorded verbatim. Citation of Lester 1976 in parentheses at the end. So here we have our citation. Our reader is going to know that this idea about note-taking causing the problem came from Lester. And also we have changed the words. Not only have we changed the words, but we've changed the order of ideas. Here's some more color coding. So in the original quote, the idea about students frequently overusing direct quotes and taking notes, that's my lighter highlight, the yellow. It was first, and then it refers to the final paper second. In the paraphrase, that darker purple-pink idea in research papers is at the beginning, and that yellow idea is pushed down to the middle. So that's just one example of how this rearranges the ideas, but I didn't want to put too much color, so we just used one example of how to reorder. But again, this paraphrase is effective because it cites it and it changes the words and the structure of the original idea. So it's definitely in our own voice and our own sequencing. So as a quick review, you definitely want to avoid plagiarism while you're paraphrasing using these three strategies. After you craft a unique paraphrase, always compare it against the original text to ensure that your own work is original. Go beyond searching for synonyms to change the paraphrase. Make sure you rearrange the sentence structure of the paraphrase and use your own voice to make it more original. That's one reason you may want to use the read it and look away strategy when you write a paraphrase. Third, always make sure you cite your paraphrases and ideas that came from other sources, even if you write them in your own words. So let's go on. Uh-oh, this should be learning objective 3. We're not going back to learning objective 2. Learning objective 3 is considering best practices for citing generative AI as a source. And we have been sprinkling a bit of this conversation throughout our webinar with some of our examples. So this is a big hot button topic now. And one of the quotes that we have cautions a bit against generative AI use. As it says, ChatGPT's training on vast data sets of publicly available text, including books, articles, and websites, introduces a risk of plagiarism, as noted by Huang and Tan 2023, who observed that its output may resemble text from other sources. So basically, ChatGPT and other large language models were trained on large data sets of text. So the people who train it fed it, existing books, existing websites, things that they could access to teach it how people write and how people develop ideas. When we're talking about Gen AI, here we've got an example of ChatGPT. Other generative AI tools include Microsoft Copilot, Google Gemini, and there are some paraphrasing tools out there like Quillbot that use generative AI. There is even a version of Grammarly that uses generative AI. So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about generative AI. We're not talking about using Grammarly's grammar corrections, and we're not talking about using spell check in Word. We're talking about something that engages with these new generative AI technologies that have exploded in use over the past couple of years. So if our first concern is that generative AI may recreate text that other people have written before, we also have some others. Um, Huang and Tan, 2023, and Derga et al., also 2023, collectively noted several additional practical and ethical concerns regarding the use of generative AI for academic research and writing. Generative AI output may include hallucinated, meaning fake, inaccurate, or biased information because of the way it generates text, because it may have read training materials that had errors in it, or because the human trainers were biased in terms of the information that they chose to use to train it. It may demonstrate the perspectives of one group over another and have bias in that respect. Generative AI obviously also is a machine. It's not a person. So it lacks true understanding of concepts and contexts, and therefore the way it's writing about things may not meet your purpose and audience the way that you need it to. Another concern is that a lot of generative AI tools have a paywall associated, meaning you have to pay for access. That reduces equity by limiting access for some people. And overusing AI tools, if you use them too much, it may actually weaken your own ability to think creatively and critically. So when we're talking about citing generative AI and using generative AI, we need to make sure that we keep this next concept in mind, which was from Derga et al. In an article for Biology of Sport, which is a peer-reviewed journal, highlighted the ethical issues raised by the application of AI tools, noting that there are certain responsibilities that all authors of scientific research papers bear, which cannot be assumed by any computer or program. So it's up to us to make sure that we use it correctly and ethically, and to make sure that it's accurate. Um,
Question.
yes.
Don't some of the ACU courses have color rating to indicate whether AI can be used or not?
Yes. So different courses that you take at ACU have different guidelines for how you can use it. And you want to make sure that you always preference those guidelines when you're making a decision about how to use generative AI in your coursework. Some of the instructors might say it's okay if you use it to make an outline. Some might say it's okay to use it to develop content that you use for your paper. But make sure first that they say it's okay. Secondly, we have guidance from our wonderful friends at APA regarding how we can use generative AI responsibly. So they have this list of guidelines, which is first, make sure you describe how you used it. If you used it to develop an outline somewhere in your paper, you need to acknowledge that. If you decide to quote relevant text or recreate an image from generative AI, you have to include the prompt and the relevant text or image in the paper. Um, because generative AI is not reproducible, the output's not reproducible, like you can't go back to it and see what it said in its original positioning. You can also include the full text of your chat with the AI in an appendix of your paper if you want to. That is optional, but if you want to record the exchange for posterity and to help others understand how you got this idea, you might want to use the appendix strategy. And of course, you need to cite and reference it according to APA guidelines, which again is interesting because we have this thing called author date citation in APA format. And when you're using generative AI, who is the author? Well, they gave us an answer for that. Um, their format for citing and referencing AI tools is adapted from the APA 7 template for software, which is in section 1010 of the publication manual. If you want to read a lot about it, I strongly encourage you to go to this blog post, which was most recently updated about a year ago. It's called How to Cite ChatGPT, and they go into the ethical and practical questions of using AI in your work. So here's an example based on that template. First, you put the name of the company. So they have declared that the author of anything put out by a generative AI tool is the company that is responsible for creating it. Then you put the year, the name of the technology with the version, and then in square brackets, you put what kind of software it was. Then the publisher, and then the URL. So here's an example for Microsoft Copilot. Microsoft is the company. 2024 was the version used in this pretend example. Copilot for Microsoft 365 is the name of it. GPT-4 was the version. It's a large language model, like ChatGPT, and the URL is as we see, starting with https copilot.microsoft.com. You can use the strategy of author date, either a parenthetical citation, which would be Microsoft, 2024, or if you want to name Microsoft in your text, Microsoft parentheses 2024 indicated. One thing to keep in mind that if you are directly quoting, because this is not retrievable, we can't provide locator information. So you don't need to include page, paragraph, or section heading. You just include the author and the year when you are citing generative AI. Here's another example of how you could present information that was put forth by a generative AI tool where you are including the prompt and the answer. So when prompted with, "Can you, as an AI model, understand meaning?" the ChatGPT generated response highlighted the program's nature as a large language model. Quote, "My understanding is not the same as human comprehension. It's more about recognizing patterns in language and context to generate coherent responses." End quote. And then after that, I have the citation for OpenAI, 2024. And in this case, maybe I put the whole exchange in my appendix. I could put a semicolon and then write see Appendix A for the full output if I want to give the reader somewhere to look for the original context. If I didn't include the appendix, I would just put the closing parentheses after the 2024 and then my period. And then here's the reference, which again, keys to OpenAI 2024. Remember, as Sarah brought up earlier, please make sure to defer to the AI use policies defined by the instructor, institution, or if you're trying to publish, the publication. Some instructors may not allow the use of AI at all. Others may limit the ways you are permitted to use it, or they may require you to follow steps for documentation that differ from or exceed the requirements of APA. For instance, I've seen an assignment from ACU that required the students to include explanations for why they chose to use the tool and what benefits, if any, they perceived from its use. So that was more than APA requires. So you need to make sure you follow that. Keep in mind that ACU's academic integrity policies, linked here, may be applied if the instructor detects inappropriate AI use. When you submit your work, it goes through Turnitin, and Turnitin does have an AI detector that the instructor has access to. So if they see a high percentage For that detector, they may be concerned that you have used AI to write a significant portion of your draft, in which case they would follow our academic integrity violation procedures just to check to see what's going on. Also, be transparent about using AI by appropriately acknowledging the manner of use and referencing and citing it. Please make sure that you use other reliable sources to verify the accuracy of any AI-generated content. Multiple sources. Don't rely just on AI to write your paper. Use other reliable and authoritative sources too. And always be prepared to take responsibility for any AI-generated content that you choose to incorporate into your work. So we have hit the end of this webinar. During tonight's webinar, we used a variety of sources and examples to understand why writers integrate and cite source information, to integrate and cite quotations and paraphrases in APA format, and to consider best practices for citing generative AI as a source in a paper. Before we wrap up, let me tell you very quickly about our online writing center. You can check out the online writing center group in our My ACU page. You can watch this video on the second line for steps to make an appointment and submit your paper. We work with you at any stage of your writing, whether you are pre-writing, trying to find sources, trying to figure out how to use your sources, integrate them into your paragraphs, trying to figure out how to cite and reference your sources, or anything else. We can help you. There are two types of appointments available on our schedule. You can make an email or asynchronous appointment when you upload the paper. In that case, we send you feedback by email in 24 hours, within 24 hours of the appointment time. That email is titled something like Writing Center Report. You can also make a Zoom appointment when you go to the schedule right at the appointment time, which is Central Time. So if you make an appointment for 6 o'clock, it's 6 o'clock Central Time. And you can come talk to me or Sarah, or our other Zoom tutor is Christy Apostle. Just click on the Zoom link in the appointment at the time of your appointment. Sarah loves to point out that you can make our appointments 2 weeks ahead of time. Sarah, why is that useful?
That is super useful because if you already know when an assignment is due, then you can be proactive and schedule to meet with a tutor before that deadline and use it kind of as a pre-deadline so that you're staying on track.
Yes, accountability. Um,
Yes, or your accountability buddies.
yes, exactly. And it also helps if you have a question as you're going. Don't wait until the end, get it cleared up, because then maybe you will avoid having to rewrite something that you might not have
Mhm,
had to rewrite if you had just checked earlier.
mhm.
We also offer many writing related resources on our online writing center website. When you schedule your appointment, you go to WC Online. That's the name of our
Yes.
hosting website. And then you just upload your paper to the appointment form. As we just said, you can make your appointment 2 weeks ahead of time, even before you have a paper, or if you don't have a paper at all. But if you do end up writing something and you want to share it with us for the appointment, you can upload the paper, 2 weeks later, right before the appointment, and that would be fine.
Yeah. And for Zoom appointments, if you're making the appointment to brainstorm and you don't have anything written, then obviously you don't need to actually upload anything. So don't freak out if that's
Yes.
the case. It's a Zoom appointment.
Don't worry if you're not uploading for Zoom.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. I mentioned we have resources. Here are some of them.
We do.
This is the link to our ACU Library Distance Learning portal where you can go and look for sources. We
Or
offer,
reach out to a librarian.
yes, for assistance in finding sources or citing sources or getting a source through interlibrary loan that you would really like, but that we don't have here. They're very helpful with that.
Mhm.
Um, we offer an APA template that can help you with the specifics of APA formatting to make that part of your writing less oppressive. You don't have to worry about the font and the margins and things like that because we already have it in there for you. If you click on this
Mhm.
link, you will download the template or go to the template so you can download it. We also
Mhm.
offer a really cool APA self-paced course in the Rise platform that we worked with some awesome people in the university to construct last summer. It's interactive. You get to click on things and do colorful quizzes, and it's a lot of fun if you're an APA nerd like me. We also
Or
have,
or if you want to feel a bit more confident about APA, if you are not an APA nerd yet.
you might become one, you never know. We also have our online writing center APA YouTube playlist. You can contact us with your APA related or other questions at our central email address, which is onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu. We try to answer all questions within 24 hours, and you will get a random tutor responding to you. You can schedule an appointment at the second link. You can use the third link to visit our website. We have other webinars on our website and on our YouTube channel, however you would like to access it. They're the same webinars. These are the most current links or most recent links for the slides and videos for our Intro to APA 7th edition webinar. And we have a webinar on referencing and citing AI tools in APA style if you're interested in learning more about that. That was a fun one because we talked a lot about Toy Story and making bad images using Microsoft Copilot, so that was fun. And that brings us to the end of this webinar. We appreciate your learning with us today. Thank you so much, Sarah, for coming and co-hosting with me.
Yeah, you're so welcome. This was a really good one.
Thank you. It was fun to put together. This was actually an update of our older Avoiding Plagiarism webinar, so it's kind of reinvigorated and added to with that wonderful picture of the woven blanket, which I particularly like.
And that delicious sandwich.
Yes, the sandwich. Sarah and I really like visuals, so we
Yes, we
appreciate
do.
your coming and looking at the visuals with us and learning with us. And I'm gonna click to end the recording, and then we can see if we have questions.